Again, welcome to everybody. I first met Paula Krugmeier at Carpet and Textile Forum in California, a wonderful event, and spent time with her at ICOST in Istanbul this June. So very pleased to have her presenting to us today this wonderful webinar. And now, Sherry Hunter of Textile Museum Associates of Southern California will introduce our speaker today. Over to you, Sherry.
Thank you very much, Jean. Here I am. And Paula, would you please turn on your video as well while I introduce you? First, I want to thank again the New England Rug Society and Jean and Julia for inviting Textile Museum Associates to co-sponsor this program. We've done 2 in a row, and this is really fun. So let me introduce Paula. Paula was born and raised in the Los Angeles, California area and received degrees in architecture from the University of California, Berkeley, and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's School of Architecture and Planning, known to us as MIT. Her architecture practice spanned 40 years in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and San Francisco. At MIT, she developed an interest in the public realm, the relationship between buildings and urban form, an essential theme of her career. In 1990, when living near the de Young Museum in San Francisco, Paula wandered quite by chance into an exhibition of Anatolian kilims presented concurrently with the ICOC 6, International Conference on Oriental Carpets. That epic show sparked her interest in collecting rugs and textiles and inspired travels including 6 trips through Central Asia, as well as journeys in Tibet, Ladakh, Turkey, Greece, Syria, the Balkans, and Russia. About 15 years ago, Paula acquired her first Syrian textile, and she has since assembled a collection encompassing a range of pieces from the region, some of which we will see today. In 2015, Paula scaled back her professional responsibilities, maintaining a consulting role until 2021. She resides in Oakland, California, with a second residence in Milan, Italy, the home city of her husband, Gianmaria Zandarighi, also a collector of textiles and a wonderful photographer. Paula spoke about Lebanese and Syrian textiles at Carpet and Textile Forum, an annual gathering of rug and textile lovers held in Santa Ynez, California, and we welcome her today. Paula, take it away.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Jean. Welcome all, and thank you to the New England Rug Society for the opportunity to speak, and to the Textile Museum Associates of Southern California for co-sponsoring. I started my collection of this group of textiles with an eye-popping moment the first time I saw a Syrian abaya for sale at one of the annual merchants shows about 15 years ago. Many of my collecting endeavors started with a love at first sight moment, and when I would purchase in spite of little or no knowledge about a piece. But since then, I continue to collect silk pieces that seem to be interchangeably called Syrian or Aleppo or Lebanese or Mount Lebanon. It was some years later that I sorted out the differences in origins, which I hope to clarify for you all today in this webinar. I've chosen to compare and contrast 2 groups of textiles from the region: accessory pieces from Mount Lebanon and the abaya cloaks from Syria, mostly Aleppo and Damascus. In this presentation, the pieces shown from other contributors are labeled as such. Those pieces that are not labeled are from my own collection, and the pieces from museums are all open source. The Eastern Mediterranean has historically been referred to as the Levant. For centuries, it was under Ottoman rule, which ended with the loss of Germany, the Ottoman Empire, and the Central Powers following World War II. The map represents the geopolitical regions designated by the Ottoman leadership. Each colored entity was called a wilayet, which were composed of smaller jurisdictions called sanjaks in Turkish, or they were called mutasarrifat if they had a more elevated administrative status, with a leader called a mutasarrif. The first part of today's webinar will cover accessory pieces woven in Mount Lebanon, the region shown here in yellow, located around the city of Beirut. Under Ottoman rule, the mutasarrif of Mount Lebanon occupied a coastal portion, which is just a small part of today's nation of Lebanon. The second part of the webinar focuses on abaya or cloaks from Aleppo and Damascus. In Mount Lebanon, there is a fascinating story of how the geopolitical events shaped the weaving culture in the 18th and early 20th centuries. In the Ottoman era, Mount Lebanon was the home of diverse religious groups, as you can see here. The predominant populations were the Druze and the Maronite Christians, who had long been established in the area. Civil war, there was, after a brief conflict between the Christians and the Druze in 1840, there was a much bloodier conflict in 1860. In the first half of that year, tens of thousands of Christians were killed in Mount Lebanon, in Damascus, and in other conflict zones of the region. With the suffering of the Christian population, the French came in to assist the Maronites, and the British to provide stability to the Druze. Other European nations also participated in the intervention. Most importantly, Europeans leveraged the Ottoman regime to designate Mount Lebanon a semi-autonomous region under international guarantee, and to install a Christian mutasarrif to replace the Muslim regional leader. The first governor of that period was a Catholic of Armenian origin, which didn't sit well with many Maronites. Although not without its infighting and conflicts, in subsequent decades, this intervention by the Europeans ushered in a period of relative peace. This made way for a thriving cottage weaving industry in Mount Lebanon that lasted perhaps 5 decades. The village of Souk Mikhail, northeast of Beirut, was the principal weaving center and the primary source of the Mount Lebanon pieces that I'll be showing today. Sadly, the weaving tradition in Mount Lebanon essentially stopped with the onset of World War I. The Ottoman troops pillaged the food supply and set up a coastal embargo that initiated a widespread famine in Mount Lebanon and beyond. As the war continued in 1915, to add insult to injury, there was a swarm of locusts that devastated the crops and deepened the famine. The locusts also stripped the mulberry tree crop of its foliage, which was the basis of local silk production. The history of silk production in the Levant goes back centuries, if not millennia. In the 19th century, village weaving, the silk production started on the slopes of Mount Lebanon, where mulberry trees were cultivated by both the Maronites and the Druze. The mulberry foliage is the food for silkworms in their cocoon-producing phase. Here we see an example of village-based silk production, albeit from a different rural region. They harvested the leafy mulberry branches to feed the silkworms, an activity that could easily take place in sheds or empty rooms in villagers' own homes. The next step in the silk production was to boil the cocoons to kill the worms before they start eating through the husks. The fine silk filaments are threaded off the cocoons and spun together to create usable threads for weaving. Silk dyeing in this region was largely done by the Druze. The looms were typically warped of undyed cotton, which is not visible in the final piece, as we'll see in the next images. The looms were located in village homes, and weaving was done by men. The technique is weft-faced slit weave tapestry. As illustrated here, the fine cotton warps can be seen exposed between the tapestry elements. The wefts were typically of silk and metallic wrapped threads. The weaver had to create the designs rotated sideways or 90 degrees from the eventual orientation of the object. This illustrates the nature of slit weave tapestry. Here we can see small holes or slits in the fabric between the white and the red fields, as circled here, where the wefts are returned for the next row. The slits extend until there is a diagonal or step in the design, which gives the textile its structure. Since the French had influence in this region, I suspect that this technique may have been brought from Europe to create items for the European market. Or perhaps the slit weave keelings of Anatolia provided an additional reference for this weaving technique. Looking to European tapestry weaving, there are many parallels, except of course for the size of the work. The weavers of these enormous tapestries also had to weave the figures sideways or 90 degrees with respect to the final designs. In the detail image here, the warps are oriented top to bottom. The slits were used at a change in color, but also within a color to create depth and detail within and around the hand in this tapestry. The orientation of the hand is vertical in the hung tapestry as seen here. This tapestry I found in the lobby of the San Francisco Opera House. Returning to the Mount Lebanon weavings, here we can see the two sides of a little purse in which the weaver worked the same motif left and right, but each side had different colors. And so if you look closely, you can see that each of the elements on the left has a different respective color on the right. With a better understanding of silk production, dyeing, and weaving processes, we can fully appreciate the talent and skill that went into these beautiful accessory pieces. There were several styles of purses, this one being a pouch style. The examples I'll show today are all approximately the same diminutive size. The sewing and ornamental details were likely not done in Mount Lebanon. The uncut weavings were transported to Aleppo for finishing. Perhaps this is why I've heard many merchants refer to these pieces as Aleppo instead of Mount Lebanon. The finishing details of these bags adds immeasurably to the value and status of the original weavings. The interiors of the purses are typically lined with a soft satin weave silk of a contrasting color. In these two examples, the weavers were working with the same motifs, but the final result varied in the color blocking and in the finish details, which were done later. And these two pieces, the front and the back, have the same colors. This cinch style purse is woven with the same motifs as the previous two that we saw, but it is rare, displaying the inscription of Mount Lebanon, and woven in rich colors not commonly found in these pieces. And here the front and the back is the same. Besides the reference to European tapestries, there are other possible references to European influence, as seen in the similarly sized English cinch style purse of the previous century. Here's another beautiful example of contrasting front and back motifs and variation in the finish details. I mentioned that the slit weave technique derives its structure from diagonals in the motifs. If the slit weave technique is used to create a checkerboard, like the image on the right, the slits create a line of weakness that is only held together by a few passing threads. Therefore, the square or checkerboard motif is quite rare in these pieces due to the inherent weakness of the slit weave structure, which is enlarged at the bottom of the screen there. I'm anticipating a few questions about the use of these purses. From the few Lebanese photographs of costumes of that period that I've found, I haven't seen any evidence that these pieces were used by locals. This supports the idea that they were destined for market in Aleppo and beyond. Here we see both Christian and Druze costumes on men and women. On the left is the back and front of the same piece, and on the right is a different purse of a similar pattern, but with varied finishing details. Similar motifs were also used for caps. This pair shows the creativity and adaptive reuse of the triangular pieces woven for a cap, reconfigured to make a purse. Skull caps were woven, pieced, and detailed in the same way as the purses. They're composed of 4 curved triangular segments, woven sideways with respect to the final object. The floral designs are exquisite in these 2 examples. Among these examples, I'd like to draw your attention to the piece on the right above the arrow. In the next slide, I've isolated this triangular element to illustrate its relation to a pair of slippers that I have. I've owned these slippers for about a decade and had always suspected that this unusual pair were fashioned by the adaptive reuse of segments by a creative cobbler in Aleppo. I think this picture makes it pretty clear that my hypothesis is correct. Also because this pair is unlike the classical slippers, which we can find, which were made like the purses. This is a type we see more frequently, woven in the same way. And once they are in a partial state of finish, we see the pair on the left and finished pair on the right. The Maronite weavers of Krugmeier in Mount Lebanon also created political messaging banners on their home looms. This 8-pointed star was the symbol of their resistance movement against disliked Mutasarrif or Ottoman rule, which flared from time to time after the establishment of Mount Lebanon as a semi-autonomous region. These were likely kept in the home and not sent on to Aleppo. On the right, we see an individual who was part of the resistance movement to outside rule in Mount Lebanon. Here's another pair of examples emblematic of the late 19th century Maronite resistance. The piece on the right shows a common scalloped edge between the white field and the blue border. On the left, the scallop motif is in black. Matching up the measurements of this pair, it appears that the early piece on the left has lost its outer border. Woven in the same diminutive size, the Maronites also made finely woven decorative panels. I imagine that these were also kept in the village for their own use. This is a wonderful example of their skill at tapestry weaving. And the final example of Maronite work from Mount Lebanon is a beautiful floral panel with good age. I've seen somewhat larger similar pieces. Perhaps they were used for cushion covers, but this one appears to be purely decorative. So this incredible weaving tradition tragically came to an end with war, famine, and the loss of nearly a quarter of the population in Mount Lebanon between 1914 and 1916. After World War I, the Levant was divided into different political entities by the French and English. And there was the partitioning of the Ottoman Empire, which ushered in decades of geopolitical transformation in the region. So it's fairly clear that the Mount Lebanon piece production ended with World War I. Moving on to the abaya or the cloaks, sometimes called abba. While the Mount Lebanon accessories were crafted by artisans in villages, Aleppo and Damascus in the Ottoman era were home to thriving workshop-based silk industry. Just one of the noteworthy garments that they produced was the abaya. In contrast to the villages of Mount Lebanon, the setting for producing the abaya was urban. Here an image from 1898, Aleppo, which has long been located at the crossroads of historic distant trade routes, the Silk Road network, if you will. Damascus, a city that has been continuously inhabited for 8,000 years, was a thriving mercantile center before and during the Ottoman Empire. In the distance, you can see the profile of the Straight Street, which was the center of mercantile activity, and which continues on today in the 21st century. This is a wonderful pair of images of merchants in Damascus dating from around 1900. The variety of treasures offered in the shop speaks to both the crafting and import of artisanal goods in Damascus. Syrian cities also had relative concentration of well-to-do residents, some of whom built exquisite courtyard homes and palaces. And they enjoyed a rich variety of artisanal traditions over many centuries that were further developed in the Ottoman era, including weaving workshops. The photo here in a Damascus shop depicts a 20th century automated loom. The loom width indicated by the arrow was similar to that of hand weaving workshops of the preceding centuries, for making traditional garments, as we will see next. The abaya weaving tradition in Damascus, Aleppo, and a few other smaller cities flourished in the 19th and early 20th centuries. They were commissioned by well-to-do individuals and made to order for weddings or other special occasions, or even as gifts to dignitaries. The next three slides will show how the abaya were woven, assembled, and finished. Similar to the accessories woven in Mount Lebanon, the orientation of the weave is rotated 90 degrees from the orientation of the garment. The cloak is composed of two panels that are typically from 50 to 70 centimeters wide, or on average about 2 feet. The panel on the left wraps around the shoulders and is more elaborately woven, while the panel on the right is the lower panel and typically simpler. Once the pieces are woven, the assembly is fairly straightforward. The midpoint seam is stitched together, shown here in blue, and then the pieces are folded and stitched at the shoulders, as shown in green. And then finally, the finishing. The warps are fixed by hemming and decorative overcasting at the armholes and front edges, in pink here. At the midpoint selvage, it's finished with either embroidery or piping, shown here in purple. And many examples have additional embroidery or details at the neckline or elsewhere, shown here in the orange and black texture. The traditional abaya of this period was a weft-faced weave of silk and metallic wrapped wefts on cotton warps, similar to the technique in Mount Lebanon pieces. Here is a classic example of an abaya with the simplicity in the lower panel and the intricacy in the upper panel. The silk textile has a wonderful soft drape and handle. The metallic wrapped thread wefts were of gold or silver color. The shoulder details show the tiny slits where the weft colors are turned back on the loom to create the designs. The motifs have diagonal lines like chevrons so that the slits are offset to maintain the textile structural integrity, as I illustrated in the Mount Lebanon pieces. As we zoom in, we can see how the metallic threads were integrated. The enlarged view on the left illustrates the slits, while on the right, we zoom in to see the gold metallic threads and how they're actually created by yellow dyed wefts wrapped with a silver metallic flat tape. Although the warps are not visible to the naked eye in the final garment, we can see them here in the enlarged view. And returning for a moment to the Mount Lebanon pieces, some of the silver thread areas enlarged on the left show a white weft thread wrapped with a silver tape. And just for comparison purposes, in a European tapestry, the wrapping of the wefts is much more dense. Many abaya have a large proportion of metal wrapped wefts, creating a luxurious weight and handle to the garment. The embroidered detail around the neck also adds to the status of the piece. Finishing details on this piece are done with metal filament and braided piping. It's a fairly common detail technique. Like the Mount Lebanon pieces, it's fairly common to find similar patterns with varied color blocking. The piece on the right illustrates the stripe motifs and how they can easily be mismatched at the midpoint seam that runs across the waist. I'll come back to this point a little bit later. In the meantime, the blue piece, this is the front of the blue piece, and it shows the decorative cord ties that are fixed to the cloak, and they tie across the chest to keep it closed and more flexible. And this feature can be seen on some historic artwork of the time as well. These two pieces are juxtaposed to illustrate how a difference in the patron's budget may be reflected in the simplicity or complexity of the final piece. Here we have on the left a simple two-color piece, silver and green. On the right, the motifs are clearly identical, but rendered in multiple colors. The red abaya also has a more elaborate finishing embroidery on the horizontal midpoint seam at the bottom. The backs of the abaya are typically rendered in more detail than the fronts. Figures like the one on the right were meant to provide protective powers to ward off the evil eye, that is, to protect the wearer from malice or the envy of others. The inscription on the left, in a tiny figure on an abaya we will see later, translates from an archaic form of Arabic to "do the graces of God." These cloaks were made in many saturated colors. This is the first of three in varying shades of blue. During the period in which these pieces were woven, it's widely known that synthetic dyes were being introduced worldwide and starting to be integrated with or substitute for traditional natural dyes. How this was manifested specifically in this textile group will have to leave for further study. In the meantime, back to the blue abaya. This one is a lighter shade than the previous one. To me, it looks like a rather denim color with some abrache in the lower panel. And this one, I have to say, it's one of my favorites for simplicity and color. And another one of the collection of the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. As an architect, I just love the minimalist modernism in 19th century artisanry. I have a real appreciation for geometry, so. While the colorful abaya were largely produced in Aleppo, the garments with more sober colors in brown or black were more commonly produced in Damascus. I'll show two black examples. This one is an exceptional piece with ornamental details at the shoulder and minimalist details at the bottom. And a detail of its center back. The second example is very similar, but it's a two-color piece. And it just has a beautiful geometry and weaving, also the center back detail. In contrast, this showy pair exudes luxury and exuberance, certainly commissioned by well-to-do patrons. Here, the front neck details in both examples are woven in, not embroidered on as we saw in a previous example. The abaya on the right has a cord with tassels to fix the cloak across the chest. And switching to the backs of these two same pieces, the motifs are nearly identical with variation in color and detailing in the floral elements at the top. Returning to the topic of mismatched motifs at this midpoint seam, we see how the weaver has solved this aesthetic. The middle seams are flanked by solid color, and the stripes do not extend to the selvages of the original weavings. The center backs of these two abaya are some of the most elaborate in existence. While the rectangle indicates the location of an inscription that I showed previously, the back of the other has an elaborate composition of flowers, cartouche, and botte. Most abaya have either silver or gold metallic threads, but these have both. Now to another group. These lighter summer cloaks were woven on wider looms and do not have the central horizontal seam. Two more examples of this type. I personally would welcome more information on this group, whether they were from secondary Syrian cities like Homs, or perhaps they were made for summer use, or perhaps they were more from the mid-20th century. The examples of the backs. This beauty is a deep aubergine color. I'm showing the front of this piece because it reveals the reverse side of the back neck detail. Maybe I can point it out here and here. So you can see what the reverse side of the tapestry weave looks like. The ornamental elements, their wefts are left exposed here. And we often see that the back necks of the abaya have a lining in them to cover this portion of exposed wefts. And now to the final group. The next examples show a sampling of abaya with colors ranging from magenta to purple to violet. These colors were more expensive to procure and expressed a higher station or status. This example shows an abrush in the field of the lower panel created by variations in the dyeing of the wefts. It is undoubtedly a 20th century piece with obvious synthetic dyes in the back neck detail. This rich, deep violet color is absolutely exquisite and rather uncommon. The lower field has little detailing, but to the eye, the color speaks for itself. It's another rare example with a highly elaborate floral detail back with three small figures in the center. These are human figures. And then although the contrasting designs of most abaya, as I mentioned, are either silver or gold, this one has both silver and gold. This abaya, located behind glass and another coat, is on display in the Islamic wing at the British Museum. I apologize for some reflections on the photo, but I took it through the glass case. It's one of the most exquisite that I've seen. And it is very impressive because they achieve this incredible beauty with just a 2-color pattern. They identify it as dated between 1880 and 1900 from Syria or Egypt. In front of the abaya is an exquisite sleeveless coat from Kosovo. The inscription, mashallah, in the center means if God wills. I would love to see a magnified detail of the metallic wefts on this one. I think they're probably extremely dense, and in any case, I think this is one of the most beautiful abaya that I have seen. This concludes the portion of the presentation on the Syrian abaya, but there are many other more garments from this region that are worthy of further study. For example, one potential topic would be to compare and contrast abaya from different regions. Here there are 3 from Iran and 1 Palestinian example. Or one could focus on women's and children's garments. Or the variety of other types of pieces that are made in the Levant. On the left is an example of a group of decorative niche and decorative panels and niches that vary widely. And there are a lot of examples of this type that could be studied and exhibited. And other pieces to explore: the wool Bedouin coats, upholstery panels, and flat reeve rugs from the region. If you're interested in further study of these 2 areas, Mount Lebanon and Syria, these 2 catalogs are a good place to start, as well as several issues of Holly Magazine. And that concludes the talk. Thank you very much. And I will go back to you, Sherry or Jean.
Thank you very much, Paula. Such a pleasure. I will echo as I struggle to get my screen back up. For some reason, it's sticking. I will echo many of our audience members who've been typing in not only many questions, which we'll get to, but comments on just how exquisite these pieces are. I know I was blown away when you gave a talk on some of the Mount Lebanon pieces at Carpet and Textile Forum and brought pieces to show in person. So let us get to questions. And I am also putting in the chat information on how to contact Bethany Mendenhall for anyone who could be interested in attending Carpet and Textile Forum, which is a wonderful informal gathering of carpet and textile lovers that takes place in California this year, May 13th to 16th. And you can meet people in person and bring stuff for show and tell and learn about and see and handle some of these fabulous textiles. So some questions for you. You commented early in the presentation that the weavings were made by men and not by women. Many of us collect carpets and we're used to things that are made more by women. Can you comment further?
The weavers were, as far as I know, they were men. So my expert in the region has indicated that they were woven by men in the home. And that is, I can explore that a little bit more and get back to the questioners, but that is the information that I was receiving from my local reference.
Thank you. You also mentioned with the earlier purses that they were made for export. You showed us some photographs. None of the people, Christians or Druze, were wearing these purses. They had different colors front and back. How much artistic license do you think that the weavers of those small objects had? Were they weaving for a Western market or making their own choices?
I think both. Just as exemplified by the fact that they were weaving um, political messaging panels as well as purses for the market, or objects or garments for the market, accessories. Um, that's a level of detail going back a century and a half to understand who was requesting these. I think that would take a little more research to know exactly what their motivations were uh, in terms of simplicity or complexity. It might have also been the skill of the weavers.
How about the 8 points of the Mount Lebanon stars? Any idea what that represented?
I have read several accounts, a number of accounts of the political events that happened in those decades. And there, I have not found anything specifically about why that particular symbol was used. Um, so that's again something that I would have to research.
Switching to today and tremendous political things happening in those areas, but are there artisans today keeping these traditions alive?
That's hard to say. Lebanon in the last 6 months has been uh, in chaos due to bombing. And in addition, it has had a number of periods in its history of uh, political discord and civil disruption that have been significant disruptions to life, just to daily life in Lebanon, and similarly, as you know, in Syria. And so I can't really speak to what's happening today. However, I was in Syria in 2007, and there were a lot of cottage industries uh, that did crocheting and scarf making and objects for the tourist market at the time.
Thank you. We have some questions about the metallic thread. And first, what metal or metals were those threads made from?
That is a good question. I don't know that. And in preparing for this talk, it was the first time that I took detailed and magnified photographs of my pieces. And by the way, those photographs were taken with an iPhone, and you can get about an inch away and then enlarge the piece, and voila, you can see exactly the details. But so I say metallic. What I hear from merchants is metallic thread. Well, it is really a thread wrapped with metallic tape. What exactly that metallic refers to, again, I don't know. That is something that, as I got into this presentation, I'm learning more and more, and that would be the continuation of the research that I would do. And I'm sure that many folks who are in the Victoria and Albert Museum or the Metropolitan Museum would have very explicit answers to these, that it's just not in my background.
Got it. A few questions about dyes, which our audiences are always interested in. do the blue cloaks in particular have natural dyes or synthetic dyes?
The blue cloaks that are in this presentation, I have not seen except for the initial one that was a sky blue color. And the origins of the dyes, again, we're talking about late 19th or 19th century into the 20th century. So there's always the possibility of synthetic dyes used in these, but I can't specifically talk to any specific garments that were shown here.
Thank you. And is there any connection that you're aware of between number of colors and historical time? Are the abayas, for instance, with more colors later or earlier, perhaps?
I think it was more a matter of the patron's budget.
I see. And you mentioned abayas are worn by both men and women. Are there any differences in design to indicate the gender or color, perhaps?
I'm going to go back here. Um, the image, the second image here is a women's abaya, and it was woven with a different length and different configuration to be able to cover the head. And again, the women's clothing, I think, would be a topic for another time. Again, I tried to focus the talk on two specific areas, and so again, I think this would be for further study.
Thank you. And you did state clearly that the abayas were made for special occasions, and they are all silk, or
Yes, I mean they're weft-faced weave, and the wefts are silk, or the wefts are silk wrapped with the metal tape, and the warps are cotton. I think I mentioned that. And however, that does not exclude the fact that perhaps some are woven with wool, but mostly the wool coats you can see here in the center. Those were a whole different category of garment, and those were wool.
we are doing Q&A now. Anyone who has questions, please type them in. Anyone who raises their hand, it will be ignored. Questions are only taken through Q&A. Back to that, we have some more detailed questions about dyes, which I suspect you don't want to get into today, and it's pretty technical, like about natural dye stuffs, what specific plants were used, who did the dyeing. Any comments you have, I think audience members would welcome.
Well, as I understand it, the Druze did more of the dyeing. It's like in other regions of the textile world, sometimes the dyeing was done by a specific group of people, or a certain color of dyeing was done by a certain group of people. And again, as I think I mentioned, that is a topic for a whole other talk. I think one could spend an hour talking about the dyes, their origins, and their uses that maybe have to do with gender or occasion.
Yes. A question about weave. Is slit weave the same as tapestry weave?
Well, tapestry weave is a weft face weave where the warps are not exposed. And tapestry weave can be done with an interlocking element between two colors or a slit between two colors. And the examples that I was showing were a slit tapestry weave.
Thank you. How about the pointed designs on the back of the abayas? Are you aware of anything that represented, or was it really a design choice?
The origin, I don't have any information about the origin of the chevron shaped elements on the back. However, there are some prayer carpets that show a kind of architectural column and arch. And some of these visually remind me of that. But it's interesting. I mean, even within looking at other abayas, um, you know, the choice, just doing a cloak with this type of construction can be done in any possible way. So it is interesting that in Aleppo and Damascus, that that chevron shape is repeated and repeated. It could have just been the style of the time.
You mentioned both men and women wore abayas and showed us how they were woven. One of the images showed a woman with a head covering, and we have a question about the head covering fabric in relation to the rest of the textile. Was there anything different about it? As far as you know, was it a different piece?
The woman, I believe that the questioner is referring to is the Druze woman in the costume photograph, in the historic costume photograph. And Druze women had a kind of element on their head which lifted up the veil in a tall pointed fashion, and the slit in front was for the face to see through. So that the local costumes were different than these. Oh, well, let me go back a second. Those costume images that I showed were from Mount Lebanon. They were not from Aleppo and Damascus, which were urban centers. So the abaya were made in the urban centers and mostly used in the urban centers. I don't have any, and I haven't seen any photographs that they were used in Mount Lebanon.
Thank you. Several people have asked for the slide with the two books again, if you would please. Thank you. And a couple of mentions of ikat. Was ikat commonly woven in this area? Or could you comment further?
Yes, and well, commonly, perhaps less common than the abaya. However, there are a number of examples of ikat robes which were for women, which I showed in a previous slide. So if I can go back to that. The third image here is an ikat robe from the area. And again, I think looking at these, this just opens up a whole other topic for discussion.
Another question that may be of the same ilk, opening a topic for discussion. Your title photo, the one Sherry referred to as being very popular on Facebook, shows a Persian dignitary. Does this indicate the export of abaya to other countries?
I'm sure they were exported, and as you can also see in this example here, the two on the top and the one on the left are from very different parts of Iran, and the other location that I've seen for abaya is Egypt. So I think they were probably also made outside of Aleppo and Damascus, and or they were exported. But here we're showing that they were made also in Iran.
Are you familiar with any of the many sorts of pieces you showed being made as dowry items for daughters?
Yes.
Yes. And do you have, this may be one of many specialized questions that the audience member could pose to you afterwards with your email that you've kindly provided. Do you have any information on the thread count of the abayas?
Well, I would, maybe I should have said at the very beginning that um, I didn't have a career as a museum conservator and have not really looked microscopically at these pieces. So I do not have a thread count. And so in terms of the technical questions about dyes um, and things and technical features of that nature, that has not been my history. I'm a collector and architect by history.
And a lover of beautiful, beautiful things.
Well, thank you.
All right, we're going to wrap up soon. The motifs used, do you have a sense as to whether traditional motifs were reused over a long period of time, or was there a fair bit of innovation?
Well, I think the period of these that these were made was not that long, and so we're talking about maybe 2 or 3 generations of people. And with regard, I'm not sure whether the questioner is talking about Mount Lebanon or about Damascus and Aleppo, but in Damascus and Aleppo, there were professional weaving workshops. And so those designs would have been passed uh, on through the workshop. In addition, I am sure that demands and styles changed over the years just as they do now. So in terms of specifically how to answer that, I don't have any specifics on that.
Okay, someone is dying to know if you know what was worn under the abaya.
You know, it looks like there's a series of kaftans and um, uh, the women would have worn a kind of blousy pantaloon with a kaftan over it, and then the abaya over that. Um, and it in all of the images that I've seen, there were a number of layers before the final um, abaya went on.
All right. You did mention cotton. Were there other fibers used besides silk in the woven pieces of this region?
In the ones that I've shown, the descriptions all show silk and cotton.
Thank you very much. And as we wrap up, could you go back to your slide that has your email? I think a number of your fans here who have so enjoyed this talk will want to correspond with you afterwards. One final question. Do you have any knowledge of abayas with wool or camel hair lower half?
There are abayas that are all wool and or camel hair, and those are winter abaya, Bedouin abaya, and the example that I showed previously of a children's cloak is just a child's version of those. So yes, there were. They're not in the ones that I showed today because again, it's a different category of garment.
And as we wrap up here, you have mentioned several museums. You've shown pieces from the Metropolitan Museum in New York. You have shown pieces from the Victoria and Albert collection in London. Are there other museums that have interesting collections of abayas and these other stunning textiles you've shown us today?
Uh, Yes. So on your screen right now, the Fowler Museum at UCLA has a wonderful collection that was donated by David and Elizabeth Riceborg. Some of them have already been donated. Some of them are promised. Um, and the Katona Museum, I found out about this catalog, but I haven't actually seen their collection. Now, these museums, the V&A and the British Museum and the Met, none of the pieces that I showed are on display, but they are on their website as open source. They have a lot more on their website as not open source. So anyone can go on the V&A and the Met's website and the British Museum's website and filter and see more examples of these with perhaps a more scholarly description. And then additional museums, the British Museum, in the two times I've been there, they have expanded their Islamic wing, which we saw in November. And I highly recommend going to London just to go to the Islamic wing of the British Museum, as well as that section of the Victoria and Albert. But it's incredible how many tentacles of Islam the British Museum has been able to display incredibly high quality pieces from Islam all over the world, including that beautiful violet abaya that I showed at the end.
One really is stunning. Okay, there are a few more questions that keep coming in. So people are still online. If you'll forgive us, I'll relay them to you. Abrash effect, it's a result of hand dyeing, or could you comment on that?
Yes, so the wefts are dyed in the saturated colors that you've seen in the garments, and the dyeing is not necessarily uniform, especially when you have natural dyes. And so when you weave the the carpet or the textile or whatever it is, you will see kind of a linear variation in the tones or different tonal elements of the same color. And that's just from slightly uneven dyeing or sometimes quite uneven dyeing. And then over the years, it can also perhaps fade differently.
Are you aware of any animal motifs on any of the Mount Lebanon pieces?
I have not seen any.
And you showed us earlier Christians, Jews, Maronites. Was there a particular religious group that wore the abayas?
So Mount Lebanon is on the west side of the range of mountains where Mount Lebanon is. Aleppo and Damascus are on the eastern side of that range of mountains. On the western side, the Lebanese were not necessarily wearing the abaya. On the eastern side, in the more desert regions, was where those were produced and used in a Muslim Arabic culture, not a Christian Arabic culture.
And were there multiple design influences on the people who wove these wonderful pieces? And it's a hard question because you showed us a variety of different pieces with different design influences, but perhaps you could comment briefly on design influences from Anatolia or even Persia.
I'm going to leave that to another participant, or I honestly, um, I haven't seen, to be honest, I haven't seen anything really specific. I mean, the only cross-reference that I see are the floral designs in the back of the abaya are not dissimilar to the floral designs in the accessories of Mount Lebanon. They are different, but of all the similarities between those two groups in motifs, that's where I see a similarity.
And abayas for children, were they worn by both genders as far as you know as well?
I have no idea.
All right, on that note, let me end by asking you, Paula, do you have a favorite piece from your collection or a favorite type of pieces? You've shown us things from museums, you've shown us things from your collection, and you obviously have stunning taste and a great eye. What's your favorite?
Well, of my pieces, I showed a red abaya with gold stripes, and that was my first eye-popping moment. I bought that from the the Tribal Art Show in San Francisco about 15 years ago. And there's actually a little thumbnail picture of the merchant seller wearing that in Holla magazine of that time. Of the at the end of the magazine, they show photographs from different events, and so that merchant and that abaya is shown there and is still one of my favorites. And like I said, I'm a real fan of geometry. With regard to my Mount Lebanon pieces, I think the first that I showed is by far my favorite. If you want me to go back there, I can.
Sure, let's go back there, and let me just say I feel so lucky that I was able to see and touch some of these pieces at Carpet and Textile Forum last year. They're really stunning.
Well, of the ones that I don't own, I think this one, excuse me, I like this black and white one. I think is just stunning, the simplicity. And I know a lot of people are really drawn to the floral patterns in the pendants here, but I just find this really, really stunning. And I also find the simplicity here beautiful. So my pieces, this one here, again, it just has a nice weight, a good balance of color, seems like it has good age. And then in terms of the purses, well, this pair of slippers is definitely unique. And you can see that it's worn very, I'm very happy to have this in my collection. And then, of course, well, these two on the left are my second favorites, and my very favorite one is this one.
On that note, clearly we could engage you all day, Paula. Thank you so much. This has been an amazing presentation with such beautiful things. We're all so grateful.
Well,
Thank you to Sherry Hunter for co-sponsoring, and thank you to the members of our audience. You make these great webinars, and we're so pleased to have people joining us from all over the world to be able to see these things. Thank you, Paula, and goodbye, everyone.
Thank you and goodbye.